would always be the one, you know? Carl had a lot of class, and he would always be the one that would rent the great house on the great beach. He would always think ahead and do those kind of things. You know, I mean, Carl was great. Carl loved his family. He just loved family, everybody. And, you know, he would have us over for Thanksgiving. He would arrange Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners and whatever else he could do just to keep the family together. I mean, he loved it.
Sometimes in between some of our tours, he had a beautiful place out there in Caribou Ranch, Colorado, and then he would, at the time, he would say, you know, why don't you come out and hang out with me for a couple of days there, in the Colorado mountains there. And then I took advantage of him a couple of times, and I'm really, really glad that I did, because hanging out with him and actually seeing Carl, waking up in the morning with him and him getting on the stove and cooking me bacon and eggs, that was incredible. Yes. You just remember him making those bacon and eggs, and actually they were really good. Carl made some kick-ass eggs. Yeah.
I remember that house more from like Christmas vacations and things like that than I do really living there, although I think I did live there too for a little while.
I think that he liked the mountains so much because I think you're closer to God, or you're. I think that it's more close to the spirit world, and I think he was drawn to it in that way.
I think it was peaceful up there for him. I think it was a nice place to be on his off time. I think that he was tired of LA. He was kind of done with it. I think he was just ready for the next place, and I don't know why he chose that, but I think he loved it up there. He was thinking about moving around the time he was dying. He was thinking about moving to Hawaii, but I think that for that, what was it? Almost 20 years, the mountains was a great place for him.
He said, you know, Adam, you know, why don't you come up and just visit us? Stay with us for a weekend in Palm Springs, you know? We'd love to have you up there. That was really touching, you know? Just that, you know, he would think of me, you know, like really think to go that far, you know what I mean? And, you know, it was just, I never got to do it, but it was just, it always touched me that he cared that much.
And I remember my dad and I think we went to he took me to a Cubs game, maybe in Chicago.
Carl asked me if I wanted to go to the baseball game with he and Justyn, his youngest son, to the old Comiskey Park in Chicago. That was probably been there 60, 70 years. It was the first All-Star game in 1933, as a matter of fact. So I was in total awe of that, of seeing where Babe Ruth played and all the great players in the American League at that time. So I had to thank him for that.
Carl always made a point to at least once a year take the entire cast and crew, so to speak, out for, you know, an event. Typically it was if we were in Europe or we were in some place that was kind of exceptional to the norm, and he would take care of us for an entire day of, like, from a wine tasting tour ending up with a dinner to finish. And it was a really nice thing. It was a great gesture, just to, you know, his way of saying, we appreciate what you do. There was no doubt about it that Carl was, you know, the man behind everyone getting together for dinner and just, you know, the showering of appreciation again.
He, you know, he was, as all the Wilsons are, a great lover of food and great lover of dining. You know, he loved to go out for the big meal and the wine and, you know, the whole 3-hour experience. That was just, you know, one of the things he did for his pleasure and enjoyment, and, you know, that was a big part of his life.
Going out to dinner with Carl was definitely an occasion. It was a family occasion, and he didn't treat himself as a rock star. He treated all of us as members of one big family, actually, when we went out to dinner. And he was instrumental in pulling those things together. I know that we didn't have very many days off. We worked a lot of days out of the year, and the times that we had time in a city on a night before a gig or a night after a gig were few and far between, and Carl would take the opportunity to get us together and go out for a very, very fine eating experience.
To see him laugh with that beautiful smile and that face lit up everything. Lit up everything. You know, I remember a time, this wasn't so much especially funny. Carl thought it was funny, but I didn't think it was funny. Carl had just got his Aston Martin. And he goes, "Come on, Mayor, I'm going to take you for a ride." So what does he do? He takes me up Mulholland Drive. And when I say that he was going so fast, it scared the crap out of me. It was so scary. And he just got the biggest kick out of it because he thought it was hysterical. And that car could just, you know, go in and out on Mulholland. I'll never forget it. I went, "Carl, you're driving so fast." And he goes, "No, I'm not. Don't worry, this car's safe." You know, and he would just drive and drive.
He was into, what's the comedian's name? Oh gosh, the wild and crazy guy? Steve Martin. Steve Martin. Well, he was really into that character, and which is quite funny to me, you know. But he was, you know, he had probably the best sense of humor of all of the Beach Boys.
He would come up with a phrase or a synonym or some related thing to music, and he would come up with a very funny thing. If there was the guitars were too loud or too overpowering, he said something, it was guitar aria tonight on that show, you know. He would have a phrase like that, and it would take him a while for him to laugh to his own jokes too. He would say it, and then it'd take a while, then he would laugh about what he had said.
I remember a show in Edwardsville in '77 where there was a lot of feedback on stage, and Carl very dryly said, "I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the guys for the feedback." Got a lot of laughs from the audience, but the dry sense of humor really appealed to me. It's very dry, very sarcastic, but very cool.
Carl was sitting with myself and a couple other fans and some of the other Beach Boys in a lobby in a hotel after the show in Chicago in it would have had to been 1986 because it was just before the 25th anniversary that they had in Hawaii. We were talking about taking a group of fans over there on one of those group travel things, and we were going to go through the Beach Boys tour people, and we were talking about the cost of this thing and whether people could afford it or not, and they said that they probably could make it manageable to most people, and Carl said yes, and of course I get a 25% commission. He was talking about his commission, and we were just dying laughing because obviously that wasn't serious at all, but he was saying, "Well, don't forget my commission." And we were laughing so hard.
You had a great little sense of humor too. You loved to do little practical jokes and stuff.
Oh, his sense of humor was spectacular. He had a spectacular sense of humor. He really did.
He had a great sense of humor. It was he could be pretty dry, and he liked, you know, to be silly. He'd be very silly sometimes, and I remember he used to. I think I was in junior high school at the time. I was probably 14, 15 years old, and I remember him saying and thinking that he thought it would be really funny if he showed up at my school and ran down the hall screaming "Jambalaya." He used to say that. Wouldn't that be funny? Yeah, that'd be really crazy. But no, that was really good. And another funny thing, I think maybe I was a teenager, maybe in my early 20s, and he used to give me more than one birthday card. You know, often he'd give me one or sometimes two or so. And one time he gave me a birthday card, and on the front it said "to a fine doctor." and that was like his version of he just thought that would be funny to give me a card that said "to a fine doctor." And so maybe a couple years ago I saw a card and it said something along those lines, and I thought of him and had a smile about that. I thought that was pretty funny.
Well, there were many things in the Wilson gene that I think were common to all three of them, to Dennis, Brian, and Carl. But not to take anything away from Brian and Dennis, because I love them both dearly, but I love them all dearly. But Carl had far more stable elements, and this included the humor. I think maybe being the youngest, and I think when you're the youngest, you get to observe a little bit more. I think you sit back and observe. But one of these things was humor, and Carl had a lot of it, but it was very, very subtle. And it took me a while, because sometimes I wouldn't know if he was kidding or not, you know.
Carl had a really interesting sense of humor. I remember one time, and this is kind of indicative of Carl's sense of humor, we were ordering some customized guitar picks for the members of the band. So for Ed Carter and Al Jardine, we were getting different color picks in the weight that they wanted, and we were going to have them printed with their names on them. And Carl insisted that he had a few different monikers imprinted on the picks. So not only were there Carl Wilson picks, but there also were Carl Cookie Wilson picks. And there was, Clem Howdy Wilson picks were the other ones. So Carl had an interesting sense of humor, and it came out at the oddest times, but overall it was just an indicator of his great demeanor and the great way with which he interacted with everybody, not only in the band but in the crew as well.
He had Cookie Wilson printed on his guitar picks, man. You know, my name's Cookie. Call me Cookie from now on, man. What? Yeah, well, you know, it's my new name. Okay, Cookie. All right, yeah, that's it, huh? That's it.
There was another one. You remember?
Clem.
Howdy.
Clem Howdy Wilson, right. Clem Howdy. Man, I don't know. That was a weird trip. We all had our names on the guitar picks. You know, Carl he's probably so, you know, I'm not going to hand out a Carl Wilson guitar pick. Nobody wants one of these. I'll put Clem Howdy Wilson on it.
You know what my interpretation of that is? Was that the cookie part was the Hollywood.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like,
Yeah.
You know, like, hey, Cookie.
Yeah, baby.
Hey, Cookie, baby, you know. And the Clem Howdy Wilson, the Howdy in quotes, was his corny side.
Oh yeah. I agree with that. That's exactly right.
I'm just plain folks. I'm just Clem Howdy Wilson. You know.
From Hutchinson, Kansas.
That's right. No pretense.
That's right. I'll never forget it must have been 95 or 96, Beach Boys were playing in Vegas, and so I flew out from LA to, you know, hang out for a couple days, and I had just been learning to play the guitar. You know, I didn't pick up the guitar until after graduating from college, so it was a late start, late bloomer with that. And so I brought my guitar that he had given me. I brought his guitar that he had given me to Vegas, and Fender Strat, and he came to my room after one of the shows, and he just listened to me play for a little while, mostly bar chord progressions and probably a grungy kind of thing, and just making some noise. And he sat there and listened for a while, and I'm sure he was blown away from, you know, the traveling and the touring and all that. And I remember we said goodnight. I said, okay, love you, good night. And he walked down the hall, and it was fun. It was always fun to play for him. And then about a minute later or so, there's a knock on the door, and I go to the door, and it was him. It was my dad. And he said, you know, I just wanted to come back and tell you that I think you're doing really great. And that's one of those big moments for me that I will never forget. Yeah.
Carl was an incredibly generous person. He was always there to help anybody financially, emotionally, anything he could do to help. If someone needed help, he was always there. I remember when he was very young and he had a friend, a young woman, who lived up in Big Bear. and she was crippled. And he had met her sometime when Dennis and all of us had gone up to the snow, and it was Christmas time, and he came up with this idea that he wanted to take a Christmas tree up to this young woman's home. She lived with her family, a young teenage girl, and so Dennis and Carole bought a Christmas tree. They took it up to her house. Her parents knew all about this, and they set up the tree while the kids were sleeping, her and her brother and sister, and they decorated the tree with $100 bills tied all over the branches. And this was what Carole wanted to give to her and to her family because of how he felt about her. And it was just the most wonderful gesture. And it was a story that I'll never forget because it just showed how generous both of them were when they were, from the time they were very young.
I do remember a funny time in Salton Sea when we were on tour, and we had, me and my dad and Carole had, we had rented some mini bikes. They had the little Honda 50s back then. And we were, you know, doing things legally and driving around the streets and this and that, and all of a sudden my dad cut off to this park, and me and Carole just followed him, and my dad just kept going. You know, me and Carole were kind of behind him, and he went right into the lake. It was the funniest thing I ever seen in my life. And you know, me and Carole just stopped and looked at each other and just laughed. You know, we helped him get the bike out of the water, and it was just, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun.
We were rehearsing, and they had Kokomo. And so it was going to be the 89 tour. And we were standing around in a rehearsal hall, and he came in, and I gave him a hug. And I'll never forget, he just sort of, he looked at me and he says, you know, Walt, this could be big. He says, we got a shot at the major leagues. I says, yeah, it's a shame we haven't had it before and everything. I said, I think we'll have a few people there. He says, how many people do you think we'll have, Walt? And I said, we'll have tons of people. And he cocked his head and he says, like I said, I think we have potential.
Well, I'll never forget the time that it was the day before we were going to do one of those 4th of July gigs in Washington, D.C. on the mall in front of the Washington Monument, where we anticipated having about 500,000 people in the audience. We were arriving at the hotel, and I remember being outside the hotel. I think it was the Hyatt, Washington, D.C. And Carole and Gina arrived in the car, and they got out, and Carole did this real funny, quirky dance, waving his arms around out on the sidewalk. And it was the most unusual thing for me to witness as, you know, a big star, a big rock band guy like Carl Wilson doing this funny little jig out in front of the hotel on the sidewalk.
I said, hey, Carl, man, do you remember what the license number of your Aston Martin was? Because I wanted to buy his Aston Martin. I didn't want any DB5. I wanted his. And he said, how would I know that? Like, you know, that was such incidental information to him. How would I know my license plate? You know, that was like 6 cars ago, and why would you want my Aston Martin? And I thought, why would I want your Aston Martin? What are you, crazy? That's the one that I want.
I had a particular year where I was filling in. I had quite a few situations where I was a guest Beach Boy. And in this particular time, we were touring Mexico. And America is quite well known in a variety of markets around the world, but Mexico was one of them. And Carole had given me a very heart-to-heart talk about that we were coming into Mexico City. We were going to play the Auditorium Nacional. And one of the things about having me in the lineup was that there was a certain, not a big, but a certain PR slant to it. And he was explaining to me that there was going to be a press conference when we landed. And I'm a come-along guy, you know, and he's saying, you know, Gerry, there's a press conference at the hotel. And I'm of course, Carole was very much a big brother to me, and in many ways, and I can talk about that in other stories. And so I was very much looking up to him and saying, yeah, whatever you need, Carole, yeah, I'm there. And he's saying, yeah, I think it's going to be in the such and such a room at 1 o'clock or so. And I think everybody'd be very, very interested to know that you're going to be there. And I said, yeah, no, I'm here, man. I'm ready. I'll be there. I'll see you there at 1. And he looked me right in the eye and he goes, oh, I'm not going. And it was just so funny because part of it, what I realized was he was setting me up because he needed some people to go to the press conference, and he had absolutely no inclination to be there, but he was trying to just make sure that, you know, there was some people there. That was a very Carl thing.
We were driving back from one of my baseball games. I think I was probably 13 years old, 13 or 14. And it was an early morning game, and he came up to watch me play, and we were driving home, and we were driving through Culver City at the time on Overland, and I was talking about a play or an at-bat or something in relation to the game, and I had to repeat myself, I think a couple times. You know, I told him at least a couple times, you know, whatever I was talking about, and I'll never forget him kind of coming to and saying, can you say that again? I'm sorry, I just left the car for a moment, as he was driving down the road. So I'll never forget that. That was a funny one. He's just spacing, you know, in another world at the time.
What immediately, as silly as it sounds, comes to mind is when we were on the road, when I was working directly with the band and the main players in the band, there was a couple of pieces of equipment that were essential to the tour. And they were exercise machines that we had anvil cases constructed for so that we could ship these exercise bicycles around the planet. And one thing that stands out in my mind is how important it was to Carl, because that was part of his regiment, part of his day, that this bicycle had to be where he was going to be, and me scrambling, pushing a 3-foot by 4-foot by 5-foot anvil case through an airport in Europe, trying to make it to Rocket Cargo so I could have the bicycle where Carl needed it to be.
We were in London, England, summer. Gigantic show, huge show with so many great artists there and so much on the line. And to me, at that point in my life, that looked like the biggest audience I had ever seen in my life. There were 100,000 people in Wembley Stadium, and I remember we were called to the green room just off the stage, and we were getting ready to go on, and I remember Carl walking up to me with a very serious face and saying, "You know that high falsetto part at the end of Surf's Up?" I said, "Yes." He went, "Sing it." I went, "Okay, now?" He says, "Yes, do it." Okay, and I'll never forget that, because as scary as that situation was to me, it was a sobering thing, and it grounded me, and it got me back on the ground that he would ask me to do something like that, and my instinct took over, and it did. It grounded me, and I ended up having the most wonderful, most fun, not nervous show, but just fun, and show I'd had in my life to that point. And it really showed me his side of, yes, be serious, but have fun and be a professional, and you'll just do great.
No matter what the audience was, whether it was 200 people in the audience or 20,000 or 200,000, he would put on the same kind of a show. He would put 100% into it. And sometimes if you came up on the stage and maybe there wasn't that many people in the audience and you kind of feel let down, I remember one time he came up to me and he said, "Play this show for your daughter," you know, which I've raised my level of consciousness, raised my level of feeling, and realized what Carl was about. He was about this internal thing of presenting a good show no matter what it was. It wasn't due to the audience, it wasn't due to the feedback, it was the love of the music, the spirituality of Carl Wilson. So that made a big impression on me. It certainly made the show for me, and I try to carry that with me ever since.
I remember one time we were playing a gig, and it was a pretty high-profile gig. Might have been the Hollywood Bowl, might have been in New York, it might have been Radio City Music Hall. And I was nervous, and I went up to Carl, and I said, "Carl," I said, "Man," I said, I'm real nervous, but I know everything's going to work out fine. But I just want to let you know that, you know, I'm going to be playing pretty conservative." He said, "Hey, man," he said, "don't worry about it." He said, "You know, you've been doing it for such a long time." He said, "It's good to be nervous because it shows that you really, really are into the music and want it to sound good." And I'll never forget that. Because he said it was okay to be that way. And I trusted him, you know, because with him there, you played for him. I mean, playing the music, which was wonderful, but if you played for him and you made him feel good, it made you feel good.
It was funny. I remember Carl chasing me in the park one day. He chased me. It was fun. It was fun.
It is what it is, and that is what it, you know. And that, to me, that just is such a simple way of looking at things. I mean, you can fight and fight and fight about something, but it just is what it is. And that was Carl's, I think, Carl's favorite saying. When you say, "Just is what it is," you know.
Right from the start, any strife that came into the Beach Boy group, or any problems for the women, for the wives or the girlfriends at the time, or Carl, he was an equal opportunity soother. You know, he didn't want anybody to be upset. He always had time to listen to you, to talk to you. He would say, "Carole, don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. You know, it's fine." And he'd listen, and he was just always really sensitive what other people needed. And in a way, as good a thing that was about Carl, I felt that for him, until a lot of the later years, he kept a lot inside for himself. You know, he didn't let people know what strife or what problems he was having.
And there would be times when he would say, "Oh, that's good." He had a default thing where he'd go, "Oh, that's good." And it was a very Carl statement. And sometimes it would come out, and it would come out a little too quick when maybe things weren't so good. And I'm not sure if he caught himself or if he was just playing off this very Carlism. "Oh, that's good." Because he would go, "Oh, that's good." Or, "No, it's bad." And he would kind of bat it back and forth with himself, you know. And so Dewey and I, to this day, will kind of reminisce about Carl's. "That's good." "No, it's bad." "No, it's good." And go back and forth. And it's one of many things that we that are very, very fond memories.
He'd say, "Oh, Earl, he's the guy that gets the sounds," you know, whereas, you know, what he really, you know, the code for that is everybody else just records it and it sounds normal. When Earl records it, it sounds kind of weird. But that wouldn't be a bad thing for Carl. He would pump me up, and I'd be proud of that, and he'd make me want to do more and more of that and get more and more sounds. And, you know, he was good at supporting people that way, I think.
He was called the Rock of Gibraltar in the group. Whenever we stand on a microphone to sing, he would say, "Come on, guys, quit clowning around, let's get down to business," you know. And it worked.
He would remember everything, everybody's name, and when anybody came on the road, any family member, he knew who they were. He knew their names, he knew something about them. He was a real person.
From Chuck Berry, I went into the Beatles. "Hey, man, did you ever see the Beatles?" "Oh, you're darn right I did." You know, Bruce and I, we left a show in the Hollywood Bowl or somewhere in LA and caught a plane and flew right up to Portland to catch him. You know, I wouldn't miss it. You know, he was a real fan of music, as well as being one of the greatest on-stage performers of all time. He loved music in general. Loved Bill Medley's voice. I remember, Bill Medley's the greatest baritone voice of all time. And, you know, just things like that. He would say little things that, you know, that lend it to the fact that he was really a fan of music. My entire on-stage persona I garnered from Carl Wilson, period. I mean, that's it. It's not one thing. It's not what did he say. It's how he acted. And, I mean, one of the greatest compliments ever paid to me was when McCartney first came to see our band. He came up to me and he said, "You're doing the Carl thing, huh?" And I took that to mean, you know, vocally. And he said, "Those are some big shoes to fill." And then I realized, because I was kind of like, you know, he was talking about being the band leader. And I thought, wow, yeah, well, you could never fill those shoes. There actually is something that Carl said that stuck in my mind, and it's kind of it's one of these silly little catchphrases that we develop many when we're on the road, and we all have fun with them. But still to this day, I will quote Carl and say to people, as in the immortal words of Carl Wilson, "Be sure and get some nice rest." And that was one of my favorites, because he was always, you know, that was one of the last things he would say to us during the day just before he was off to the hotel or whatever it was. "Chris, be sure and get some nice rest."
You know, a bit of wisdom from Carl. I think I can go back to something he said to our monitor engineer one day when things weren't going very well. And our monitor engineer was a big, lovable guy by the name of Dave Ranke. And Dave passed away many years ago, interestingly enough, of a brain tumor. But Dave was having some problems with some rental equipment one day, and the board just wasn't coming up right. He wasn't able to dial up everybody's mixes the way he wanted to. And Carl, although frustrated, and Dave knowing that he was frustrated, Carl walked up to the side of the stage where the monitor desk was, and he leaned down to Dave and he said, "Dave, just do the best you can. That's all you can do." And so that was I thought that was a very sweet thing for Carl to say, and Carl was very sweet in those ways that he would give you an encouraging word at just the right time to get you through a difficult situation.
He would always say, at least in my experience, we're all just doing the best we can. That was I think that one sticks out more than any other, and I think he just looked through his spiritual goggles, or he was just a spiritual guy. I think he just understood on that level, whether it's just to cut people some slack and just understand that people are just doing the best they can with either the hand they've been dealt or the tools that they have or whatever it is, and we're all just doing the best we can.
There was a man who knew many things. He was a man who knew them well.
Carl was very wise, and he learned through the years. Actually, he probably started when he was like around 16 or 17, because he was very mature, and he had to be, and he was forced to be very quickly, being so successful at a young age. But think about Carl, like Carl would do an interview with somebody, or just even talking with somebody, and he'd be asked a question, and you usually would never see Carl answer it quickly. He would always take it in his head and make sure that he gave the right answer. He very thoughtful and considerate, and didn't want to say the wrong thing. Sometimes he was just too careful. Sometimes I just wanted him to let go a little bit more. But, I think in Carl's eyes, someone had to be, because, both of his brothers were out there, and someone had to be the stable one. That was Carl.
I think just the focus that Carl had on the music, no matter what he was feeling outside the musical realm, the fact he could focus in, the fact that he could take songs that he'd been already played for 2,000 or 3,000 times and focus on them so exclusively to everything else, so that the technical problems of the music were irrelevant. And you could bring feeling into the music, even if it was a simple tune or a complex tune. Nothing was done shoddily. It was all done, it was almost over-rehearsed, so that by the time you got on stage, you were no longer thinking of technique, or am I going to do this right? Your total focus was a feeling you can put into the music and into the audience, which I took that from Carl. I think that more than anybody else, he showed me that. We would rehearse 4 or 5 days sometimes in LA before a tour, and we'd go over songs we'd played the year before. We'd add new songs.
Tom, baby. Tom. 1, 2. Yeah, you're a little too soft. Thank you. Turn up a little bit. 2. Thank you. 1, 2, go!
That one thing, that ultimate professionalism and rehearsal and focusing in on the music, and then a flawless perfectionism, I guess you call it, but without the negative import of that. Just a total professional.
And what he taught me as a life lesson was to pay attention to detail, to certain things. Bring that to your show, bring that to your life, each and every day, each and every performance, in every way.
He would encourage me to travel. It was something that he thought was just so important and such an education, and he was very generous in terms of being willing to send me around the world, to different places, and it was important to him that his kids get that experience of traveling because he had had so much of it in his life. And I think it had such an impact on him that he wanted my brother and I to have that experience too.
Carole did tell me that it was, he said, listen, surfing is just not a sport, it's a lifestyle. So he hit me to this whole thing that surfing was a lifestyle. You know, it has its own, you know, almost like its own religion, you know, and guys that are surfers are into clubs just like guys that ride motorcycles or whatever. So, you know, he made me understand that surfing was just not getting aboard and jumping in the water and floating around and trying to stand up, you know, it was the whole thing.
Carl Wilson made me a good manager. I didn't make him a good artist.
In May of 1983, I went to cover a Beach Boys concert in Memphis, Tennessee for the radio station I was working for. And I met Carl at the bar, and we were talking about Carl's new solo album at the time, Youngblood. And I was talking about how we'd been giving it some airplay, and it was a really great album. And Carl started talking to me very specifically about compression in radio, how stereo signal is compressed and how things sound differently on the radio than they do in a recording studio situation, and how he really was anxious to hear some of those tracks compressed and on the radio. At the time, I wasn't really that technically up to speed on a lot of that kind of electronics, and I was kind of tongue-tied. And he looked at me for a minute, and I could see a little bit of impatience there, and I kind of felt like I was talking to him about something that maybe I wasn't qualified to talk to him about. And I realized that this was a man who knew a great deal about music and recording and sound. And you don't step into those conversations unless you know what you're talking about. And from that point on, I vowed that in my career, I wasn't going to get into those conversations and pretend to have some kind of knowledge.
I probably learned what I would consider the key component of being a producer from a line Carl said. He says, a producer is only a guy who enables and lets things happen. And Carl was not a commander. He was just someone who let everybody do. The musicians all did what they did most naturally, and he encouraged them. And as a result, as you look back, you think, oh, Carl didn't do that, Carl didn't do that, Carl didn't do that. But in fact, it all happened because of Carl. And that's sort of been my guiding principle.
To this day, I use the things I learned from Carl. There's a particular word that he used, where he would say, if there was something that he didn't go along with, he would say, it wouldn't be appropriate. That wouldn't be appropriate. And this was Carl's word that he used when they went to South Africa. This was Carl's word if there were just too many dates, 2 or 3 in a day, or just things that he didn't agree with, where he would sometimes just take himself out. He wouldn't play the hard card and say, we're not going. But if he didn't agree with it, he would say, it's just not appropriate. And this was Carl weighing it on Carl's scale of what was right and what was wrong. And I saw Carl use that in a variety of ways. And this is his own meter. You know, the boys did, for example, Howard Stern. You know, for however you judge that in people's mind, it's a fine press move, incredibly large audience. Carl didn't agree with it, and he just said, well, I won't go to that one, you know, I just wouldn't feel that's appropriate. And I just thought there was a moral fiber there that he wasn't going to impose on everybody else, but he would use that for his own compass.
When my son Aaron was out on the road with us, he was a young boy, he showed Aaron one day how to warm up. If you remember correctly, Carl, before every show, whether or not it be a double show day or not, he would have his little cassette player with him, or a mini cassette player with him, with his vocal exercises. And he would be in the back of the bus, and we all knew those vocal exercises by heart because he would sing them every time before a show. And he had shown my son that, who was only 10, 11 years old at the time, who was going to be an aspiring musician himself, who, by the way, he is today. And Aaron, to this day, in his interviews, mentions that about Carl Wilson. And he gives Carl the credit and the respect that Carl is due.
You know, as I said in past interviews, you know, Brian simply doesn't want to tell the band guys, do this, that, and the other. But he does sometimes. But he used to rely on me heavily to say, Jeff, tell these guys to do this or that, you know, whatever it was. But now he'll just really take the charge, which I'm glad to see Brian's doing. But that's where I learned that all. Everything from Carl. I mean, every single thing.
Yeah, I learned how to be cool, how to be more considerate, more cool.
He taught me about it. There's so many values or morals that I could, you know, that come to mind where it's just integrity, compassion, just kindness to your fellow human being. He was a really thoughtful and, like I said earlier, just a genuinely warm person.
I think a lot of people can teach and tell you how to do it, and you can read it in the book, how you're supposed to be and what's the right way to act. But he was truly the living example. So he could say the words and teach you that way, but you could also just watch his behavior, and I think that was, that's what really set him apart, I believe.
I have to say that there's not a day that goes by that I don't really think about Carl. It's bizarre. Of all the people that I've interfaced with in my life, he is still a very present personality. And I think what I learned from him was how you can be in the position that he was in and still be a complete gentleman and still be able to focus on people. I mean, he would meet somebody for the first time and remember their name. And when he looked at you, he really looked at you. And he was paying complete, total attention to you when he was there. So I learned a lot from him.
Life's so strange.
Justyn had told me that his dad had a doctor's appointment for something to do with his vision.
Carl had gone, as he always did, goes to Maui for Christmas holidays, and he'd get a condo and stuff. And something had come up, I think some dizziness and stuff, and so he came back for some tests. And fortunately, in the tests, at the very last minute, there's a test you do like this, where you follow your eye, it follows the finger around. And at the time, they weren't coming up with anything. But in this particular test, the finger disappeared. And it was at the very end of, we're not really sure what, maybe a little stress, maybe cut down on caffeine, one of these kind of things. But because of that, whoa, that's not a good sign, that led to other tests. And unfortunately, the news wasn't good, because what had shown up in a brain MRI was a metastasized cancer.
When he got sick, we were all in the hospital room. I think my cousin Carole was with us too that day in the room. And he had just come back from Hawaii, and he had had some pains in his head. And so they went to check it out, and we just happened to be there that day for a visit. I don't think we specifically went to hear any big news. We were just there at Cedars, I believe. I know it was at Cedars. And the doctor came in, and he broke the news that he had cancer. He says, yes, it has metastasized. He was basically telling us that he had cancer without saying the word cancer. I remember it was like a very delicate thing, and I remember feeling a little frustrated or wanting to just hear the words and not have any doubt about it. And so the moment that I remember when we found out that he had cancer, he looked up, and the first thing he said, well, I'm not afraid to die. And I remember that very clearly. And as his son, I felt like I'm really thankful that I was there, and appreciative to see him and hear him say that in that moment, to have that. It was like an empowering thing. It's like, oh, well, if he's not afraid, then I guess I don't need to bother.
But as Carl dealt with this illness, if ever there was a textbook case of how to deal with it, his was the one. When Carole was working on the possibility in his head of continuing to tour, he decided that he could best approach this if he got a bus. And so he wanted to pick the right bus, and he wanted to try it out. So he rented the bus that he was considering using. Gina's going to come. I don't know if there was going to be a nurse or something. But he called me up to say, all right, we figured out we're going to try the bus out, and I've worked out a route. You tell me what you think. And he said, we're going to go down the 4, we're going to get on the 10, we're going to go out the 10 to Palm Springs. And he'd worked out some loop, which he was thinking was the kind of a good way to kind of get the vibe on how the bus would, and he was so enthused about this kind of, thing about whether or not the bus would be appropriate. To me, most buses are the same bus, but the story here is that there was passion and enthusiasm in wherever he could find it, and I'm listening to him, and I don't want to say it was bittersweet. It was just, again, another lesson, and I'm listening to him. First of all, I'm always happy to get a call, but I'm going, that sounds like a great route, Carole. That just sounds fantastic. And I said, maybe call from, and now I'm trying to get on board. Maybe call from the bus. Let me hear how the reception is from the bus and stuff. And so there were moments like that throughout the year. And of course, we all know the end of the story. It was not a good year with the most tragic of final chapters. But you know what? Very few of our final chapters are pretty, and neither was Carole's. And all I can say is it was much too soon.
Well, Carole called me, and he called on the phone, and if I remember correctly, he called from the hospital. I think that was where he called from. Yeah. And he said, Mary, I just, I've got cancer, and, it's pretty bad, or something like that. Well, needless to say, that destroyed me. And, of course, just the thought of losing Carole, because he was like my brother. I loved him so much. That was so heart-wrenching. And I went, no, you can't. I said, I can't stand it. And he goes, now, Mir, I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to fight it. And he kept saying, I'm going to fight it. And so I started crying, and then all of a sudden he starts crying. I'll never forget it. Never in my life. It was like, what can we do? It's out of our hands. It was just, that's the biggest loss ever.
Marilyn had called me to let me know that Carole was sick. And it was shocking, actually. It was so hard to believe that he was so ill. And not too long after I found out, of course I tried to call him and left messages for him, and before too long he called me back one night, and we talked about it for a while. And at the beginning he was, it wasn't about him, he made it about me. Carole, I'm going to be okay, don't you worry, you take care of yourself. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but it was about, he was concerned about me and my feelings, and it wasn't about Carole. And then subsequently, we had several conversations in between those times, from when he was diagnosed and before he passed away, where he was able to, talk about things that he was saddened about or regretted or wished he could do over, and mostly wanted to make sure that everybody knew that, Justyn and Jonah would be taken care of, not in the financial sense, but just that family would always be there for them. And also, a great deal of love and caring about Annie.
But I know it was hard for him, and it didn't take much, if you had eyes to see, that there was some times that on stage he struggled. And he had a hard time, and he needed a stool. And he stumbled and almost fell off the stool. And it got me, and what I'm so happy for is that he had what I call another great summer in the sun. And I was fortunate enough to see Carole have his last summer in the sun. But he didn't, and he knew it could be his last. There was no doubt. Didn't act that way. You know, didn't want any kind of help, sympathy. After the show, and I think it was Hershey, Pennsylvania, near the end of the run and everything, and he looked at me and I said, boy, you sound as great as the first time I heard you in '65. And I gave him a hug, and he looked at me, he says, good, he says, and he says, like your dad used to say about practicing, I'm going to keep using this instrument because you know what? We got to book that tour for 2000. And I said, count on it. And he says, oh, I will.
You could never tell he was sick, never made it about himself, was interested in what I was doing, even though I didn't spend a lot of time, interested in what my friend Sandor was doing. I mean, he, you know, very unselfish.
When I first heard Carole was sick, I lived in Los Angeles for a couple of years, and I actually heard it on K-Earth radio in the evening as I was driving through Burbank, and the DJ at the time, who I think might have been the real Don Steele, on K-Earth said, you know, a good friend of ours, Carole Wilson, has cancer, and he told the story, and I was just, it was like a part of my life had just ended at that point. Of course, I said a prayer for him and continued to do so, but I'd say that was a major turning point in my life as a human being.
We were at a hotel, and it was his first time back, and we set up the whole band, full stage, in a hotel kind of banquet room. And I remember him walking in. We all just were very quiet, and he all walked in, and we didn't say a word. He picked up his guitar or whatever help he had to put his guitar on, and we started rehearsing.
He was a hard worker. He really was a very, very hard worker, you know, and worked until the end. Worked far longer than I think a lot of people would have in that condition.
Probably May of '97, when we were playing in Las Vegas, and I was fixing my drums before everybody came out on stage. Everybody was backstage before we went on, and I see Carole come up the 6 or 7 stairs up to the stage, and I knew he was quite ill, but he was strong. I mean, he was strong to the end. And as he walked up and he finally got on stage, I looked at him and I said, Carole, I said, I love you. He said, hey, Mike, I'm good. I said, no problem. But I just had to say that to him because first of all, I meant it with all my heart. And the fact that, you talk about your immortality, it could be any one of us. But it was a drag that was him.
I got the news about it, and I was just, I was in major depression. It still affects me today that he passed at 51. He got snuffed out a little too soon.
It was pretty shocking, man. Yeah, it was pretty shocking. It was as shocking as John Lennon getting shot, that's for sure.
Well, I couldn't believe that this 50-year-old icon was ill. But I remember, man, it's when Audrey passed away in December. It was either Carole or Elliot called me and said, no, it was Elliot. He said, Carole wants you to be at his mom's funeral. He wants the real band together one more time.
And who do we have here? What a perfect person, but Audrey Wilson, the matriarch of the Wilson family.
Say that.
A perfect way to begin my video. Are you excited to be out here with us, Audrey?
Are you writing a book? Oh,
I'm making a tape.
Stop it. Yes, Billy, I'm having the time of my life. Actually, you know what? I am.
What?
I'm enjoying this so much. I just love it.
Good. Well, we'll catch up with you later.
Yeah, well, I remember being on the road with Grandma Audrey in probably the mid-90s, early mid-90s. So she was getting up there and in age and mostly getting around with the wheelchair. And I remember it was always a scene, you know, pushing her up the ramp and down the ramp, and her kind of hanging on for dear life.
I don't think she liked anything more in her life than being out on the road, because she was like the queen out there. You know, I mean, just everybody would, you know, just pay her a lot of attention and loved it. I mean, she was such an incredible lady anyway, but you know, she was kind of like the mother hen out there on the road. I think that she loved that attention and that time, and you know, loved to hear the music and see the performances, and you know, I mean, that was just a huge part of her life. I don't think that could be overstated.
Yeah, I think she was a humble person for the most part. She was never braggadocious or anything like that, but at the same time, I know she was extremely proud and never shied away from that fact that she was, you know, quote unquote, the mom of the Beach Boys. She loved that.
He had brought his mother out so many, many times. He was such a wonderful son to her, and he was ill at the time, and I just felt that I wanted him to know, since my mom had passed away, and I just wanted to relate to him how much I thought of him as a son, and what a wonderful experiences he gave his mother, bringing her out on the road and being so gracious. He was a very gracious man.
Oh, God. He loved his mother so much. He was the one who took care of his mother. Not that Brian and Dennis didn't love their mother. They absolutely did love her. But Carl was very close to her. And of course, Carl was the last one to leave home. You know, he was the last one to leave home. And Audrey confided in Carl, where she didn't, Brian and Dennis were too much, they had too many things going on in their lives, and their lives were too hectic. But Carl, you know, he was the settled one, and Carl cared about his mother and what she was going through in her, you know, latter years. And she depended on Carl, you know, for almost every last decision. So, it was a wonderful son-mother relationship.
I think that my dad was probably the most like my grandmother of all three brothers, and they definitely had you know, just a really special connection. He was the one, you know, that really took care of her in her old age. You know, her other sons weren't there for her like he was. And I think that he felt, not an obligation, but I mean, I think he felt it was just a natural thing for him to do. But I also think that he really enjoyed the time with his mother. So I don't think it was something that he, you know, I don't think it was obligatory in a negative way. I think it was something that he just felt like, of course he would do. And so, and I think she always knew that and really appreciated it until the end.
Life's so strange.
He got the word that he had a blood clot or something and had to go have it taken care of immediately. And, you know, I don't think any of us expected that to be the last time we were going to see him, but it really was.
Well, I think we were, I don't remember exactly where we were, but we were on tour. And I had no idea that would be the last time. We had a tour bus. Carl had a tour bus, and we had the kids with us. And we were all, you know, planning on seeing him again. And we just didn't expect things to go like that.
And I remember the last time I saw him was on stage, and we used to always hug, but we weren't hugging back then, and because he was afraid of catching something, because his body was very weak, and so that was the last time I saw Carl.
Just above Sunset. I don't know if it was his place or if he was renting, but we went up there to help him just clear some cardboard boxes. Justyn wanted me to come with him, and I remember you couldn't speak above a whisper, really. Sound was really sensitive for him, and he still had that "I've got it together" thing going. He still seemed so strong and so like everything was okay. And I think he just didn't want to convey anything maybe to his son or to either of us, but I was blown away at his ability to stay in that person who never changed in the face of what he was dealing with.
The last time I saw Carl was at Audrey's funeral.
The last time I saw him was, I believe, at Audrey's, at the wake. After the funeral services for Audrey, his mom, may she rest in peace, wonderful woman, at Marilyn's house there on Sunset. And I knew what was going on in his life at the time. I knew he was sick and not well. And I loved him so much that I didn't want to break down in any way, because I didn't want that to be our last time together. I didn't know if it would be our last time together. We sat quietly in a corner, and we just talked about the past, without getting too serious. The things we did, the things when we hung out together on the road and just had fun and enjoyed ourselves and maybe went to dinner. I didn't ask for any serious talk, and I wasn't about to venture any either or get philosophical for any reason, but just to pass a nice time with him so that I could remember that if I wasn't lucky enough to see him again, that the last time I saw him, we had a nice time.
The last time I saw Carl was after Audrey passed, and we were all up in Audrey's apartment, and Carl was there, Brian was there with Melinda, and they were all just sitting, talking, and Brian was actually sitting behind the piano in the apartment, and they were talking about how proud she must have been of them. It was very surreal to watch Carl and Brian talk about their life, just as brothers talking. It was very, very cool.
He was a nice guy, and I hate to see him go.
Jerry Schilling was by his side virtually every minute of this thing. And I would, if not speak to Carl, I would speak to Jerry, and so stayed up to speed, I think, in all ways that I possibly could.
He was wonderful to the end. Ironically, I left here on my birthday, February 6th, went down the street here to Les Domes to pick up dinner to take to Carl and Gina, Cindy and I. I told him the night before, I said, I know you don't feel like this, but no, bring the food, we're going to celebrate your birthday. And while I was at Les Domes, Gina called, where are you? And when I got there, Carl was gone.
Somebody said all things will pass, all things will pass away.
I really miss Carl a lot, and what I can say about him is that he was a person that had a really big heart. He was always there for me. I mean, especially after my father passed away, he was right there, and regardless of how busy he was or what he had going on and what he was doing at the time, he was the kind of person that would stop and listen.
Carl's spirit was really part and parcel of the Beach Boys singing. His spirit was probably the spirit of the Beach Boys. He was had the most spirit about him out of all of us. More than Mike, more than me, more than Alan, more than Bruce. His spirit, he was just more on top of things. Better singer, better person, all that stuff.
I know that everybody knew how spiritual he was, and that was a big thing. But unless you knew him and actually heard his speaking voice, and even within a couple feet from him, he had a way of soothing the air. And I remember that as a child, and then through the years as a young man, even though I didn't spend a lot of time, one of the most down-to-earth, unoffensive people, that ever lived. Absolutely, absolutely.
All the people that were the Beach Boys, whoever they were at this point when we were playing with them, was, the Al Jardines and the Mike Loves and the Bryans and wherever Bruce fit in, they all fit into a place when Carl was alive. When Carl passed, it was gray. Not sure who was what, who was the Beach Boys, who. It just became, it didn't become that solid nucleus that we knew when Carl was alive.
And I still think of him like, it's weird, but he's still on tour to me.
We'll miss Carl. I was really sad about his departure from this planet.
I could say so many things about Carl Wilson, but in general, some of my best memories from my career in rock and roll are based around Carl's quotes, Carl's moments with Carl. I can't say enough about him. He was not only the voice of an angel, the heart of an angel as well.
Amen.
Carl Wilson made a great impression on me as being the kindest, most wonderful man I've ever met. And I'm very proud to have been a small part of his life.
There will never be another Carl, never, ever.
I miss him like a brother. I loved him. He was a sweet, sweet man. And I can't say enough nice things about Carl Wilson.
Carl's the one that should have outlasted them all. He was so calm and easygoing and made everything happen. It just seemed like he should have lasted forever.
Carl Wilson's place in rock and roll will always be documented as someone who brought a lot of dignity, grace, and beauty to the sounds of the 60s. And I'll miss him a lot.
Oh, he was just everything. He meant he was one of the Beach Boys first. Fine, fine, fine musician. Wonderful personality, wonderful disposition, and he was actually kind of like a brother, actually. He felt like, they all did, they all do, felt like a cousin. I feel sort of like the way I feel about my cousins. Like a relative, not quite a brother, but not just a friend either, but almost a relative. And he was just a really nice guy. Someone, if there was a real dire emergency, I could call on him. I didn't have to, thank goodness, but I could have.
Beautiful music and a good heart, and basically I knew the man from the inside. So I love him.
The sacrifice that Carl made to make sure that Brian had a chance to live a decent life. And Brian, at that time when Carl had to be almost the bad guy out of pure love to save Brian, who Carl's efforts certainly, with a lot of other people, but Carl had to be the strong guy, is why we can see Brian doing so great today.
His death shook me up all the way to hell and back. I was really shook up. I had a hard time dealing with it. He left us at a time when we were just about to start getting back together more, I miss his face and his voice, of course.
I've heard other people say this before, but it was like Carl was always going to be there. And when he wasn't, things changed, even for me as a fan.
Carl's illness must have been a very hard thing on everyone, obviously, but his death afterwards has even been more hard than we thought too. I mean, it's an odd thing. Not only do we miss his presence and his his spirit, but it has affected everyone greatly in more ways than we ever thought.
I just would have loved to have seen what Carole would have done had the band continued to write and record and and evolve as a band.
Yeah, he was the Beach Boy when I met him, but that didn't last very long. He just became Carole.
I think he and I became pretty close, as a stage technician, a stage manager, and a production manager, working with him for over 10 years. I think about Carole pretty often, and I really miss him.
I've had a very charmed life, and I've been very privileged and honored to have had the opportunity to spend as much time as I did with Carole and with the band. And, to see the world in that type of environment was just, it was an amazing thing. And it's something that has impacted me greatly and something I will never, ever forget.
Yeah, he just seemed like a very gentle guy, very soft-spoken and civilized. I never really heard or saw him perform face-to-face, so I can't comment on that. But the guy just had a certain quietude about him.
I knew Carl Wilson when I was his lighting designer for many years, and when he passed away, Rolling Stone magazine wrote an article, and the writer said that Carl Wilson had the most spiritual voice ever, and that was my experience.
He had so much to give. He's still giving. Even though he's not here and we miss him in every way, but he was wonderful.
Like I said, at his memorial service, he was, I think, by far my greatest teacher and truly my one and only hero. And that's 13 years since he's passed today, and or this year, I should say. And yeah, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed in that regard.
I can hear his voice still,
He was here today. We had an Easter party, and I felt his presence.
I had a dream about him one time. We're coming home from a gig. I was sitting next to Justyn, and I said to Justyn, this is probably maybe a year ago, and I said, Justyn, how's your dad? He said, oh, he's fine. He's doing good. We ended up getting to this condominium, and I happened to fall asleep. I'm in this bedroom, and I wake up, and Carole is sitting next to me reading the paper in his bathrobe. And it was like so real. It was so real.
And Carole appeared to me, and he couldn't talk, so he was just there and he was smiling, just a beautiful radiant smile, and his eyes were this beautiful, beautiful color. And he basically said, motioning that everything was completely cool. He was in a really good place, and everything was really, really good. And it left me feeling so elated and so fantastic.
I would rather that I'd known him as long as I did than to never have known him at all.
I'm glad I was one of the people that, I'm just getting a little choked up and thinking about him. Just sad that he passed on too soon. That was the only thing that was just too soon that he passed on too soon.
All right, we got it.
Wow, awesome.
You got it. These things are hard, but
I know.
We're doing them for Carole, right? Doing them for Carole.
If he walked in the room right now and sat down over there next to you, what would you say to him?
It's great to see you again. I missed you.
Wow, I'd be tickled pink.
It's just so good to have you back.
I just hug him and say, I love you, man. Where you been?
Can I hear you play God Only Knows?
Do you have any new music? Can I hear it right now?
I don't even feel qualified to answer this question.
Finally, it's about time.
I probably just hug him and couldn't stop crying.
I probably get my dad's guitar. My dad has an old 1954 Martin, and I'd say, Carole, would you just play it? Just play it.
I would give him a hug, and we would probably have a pleasant conversation about nothing too important.
I'd just say,
I'm good, but I'm a lot better now.
Carl, it's so good to see you again.
I probably wouldn't say anything. I would probably just listen, because that's what I've done my whole life. Listen to him sing. I'd love to listen to his stories, and I'd love to just listen to whatever he had to tell me. I wouldn't do the talking. I would do the listening.
I kind of maybe just feel his presence for a second, say hello, and tell him that I loved him.
God, welcome to my home. It's good to see you, baby. I love you, Carl, and always will.
I'm so happy that you're here because you need to be on this earth.
Let's play. Take Victoria, let's play some music together.
I don't know, I'd want to give him a big hug.
I'd say, Carl, God, I've missed you. Where you been? I hope it's been some place that's been really, really great. And I think that's where he is.
Welcome, Carl. Oh my God, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful?
If Carl Wilson came out of the door and sat down and asked me,
No, what would you say to him?
first question,
Yeah.
how's heaven?
Well, you know, Carl was just way too young, and I think he died at 51, when he was 51. Needless to say, you know, leaving his children, you know, Jonah and Justyn, and God, how he would have loved little Dean. Oh my God, he would have loved his grandchild.
What's your name?
Dean. Well, my grandson's name is Dean Carl Wilson. He was born June 18th, 2007. Justyn and Britta's anniversary. And he was born at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica with chocolate brown eyes and just a very, very sweet disposition. Dean's name, for me anyway, came out in such a natural way. The name Dean had been Murray and Audrey's, one of their very, very closest friends was Dean Brownell. Actually, Anne and Dean Brownell, very, very close friends of theirs. And Carl Dean was named after Dean Brownell. So he was Carl Dean Wilson. And then when Dean was born, it just seemed really, really natural to me that that he wasn't named after Carl per se in a really obvious way, but in a much more subtle and actually just a perfect way for Dean, because he is a Dean. He seemed like he really took things in, even at 5 and 6 months. It's like he was paying attention. He already was listening, and he was observant and looked at flowers, and he just took things in a very his own gentle way, I guess you could say. He started talking, gosh, I think he was almost 3. I could be wrong, but I remember Audrey saying that Carl, you know, really took his time talking and didn't talk until he was at least 3 years old. So there was a similarity there. Dean has such a unique sense of humor. He has what I would call a sophisticated sense of humor. He gets things that are funny when you think you're only 2. You can't possibly know that's funny, but he does. Dean is so cerebral, and that is so much like Justyn and so much like Carl that it's really amazes me, absolutely amazes me. Now, if he starts tilting his head back when he thinks, then I'll have to let you know if that thing comes up. But he's a thinker, gentle thinker.
What's your name?
Neva.
It turns out that she has those green-gray eyes that really are reminiscent of Audrey, to me. She's got, you know, honey-colored hair. It's kind of, it'll have to play out. Neva, to me, is independent. She is a girly girl at the same time as being a sports girl. She's a little jock. She's on the t-ball team with 6 boys, and she was, for a while, she was the only girl that was 2, and the 6 boys on the same team were 3. And I think she did better than all the boys. Neva is a lioness. I mean, I don't know what to say about Neva. More will be revealed. She's independent, and she's a crack up. And I have to say, I mean, it goes without saying, Carole would adore them, and I just think he would get such a kick out of Neva, because there's kind of like nobody like her in this family that I know of. He would love and adore them so much and get such a kick out of them that, you know, missing having him here, you know, as their grandfather in real life, in real time, you know, is a tough one. He is here in them. He is here and living within his sons and now his 2 grandchildren, and you know, a granddaughter and a grandson that, you know, he never got to see, but they absolutely live in him, and they're very aware of him and the music, and that's pretty amazing too.
said to me, he said to me, here and now is forever. Here and now is forever. Here and now is forever. Here and now is forever.
And Carole was out there going, life's so strange, life's so strange. And then he'd go, stop, stop, I want to do a ninth. And then he'd do a little Carole, and a little bit up, and a little bit down, and playing all around. He was literally like almost skipping around while he was doing it. It was so cool to watch. So if anyone wants to know what Carle's last recording was like, he was having a blast.